start, obviously very, very simple and obvious, but it is worth kind of starting right at the basics. To make a profit as an interior designer, that involves your project value, i.e. how much you're charging for your project, less your time and business operating costs needs to leave over your profit margin. It sounds a lot easier than it actually is. And in fact, as an interior designer, it's one of the hardest industries to really make money in, and a lot of people really, really struggle. And I think from our experience, that feels like it kind of boils down to two factors. And one is the fact that it being a creative industry, work is just unreliable. So sometimes people are super, super busy. Other times you have no jobs on. So it's really hard to manage that and hard to manage your team and your work source to kind of make the numbers add up. The other reason that comes up again and again is actually perception of the industry. And part of it is about the fact that people see it as a creative industry, and therefore almost an assumption that you maybe shouldn't really be making money of it because you're doing something that you love. And that actually happens from clients, but also from interior designers, this sort of guilt around making money. And the other thing related to perception is people just not really quite understanding what an interior designer does, which just means sometimes that charging is just a constant uphill struggle because you need to take that part of kind of educating your client really, really seriously. But all of those reasons are really, more than anything, just all the more reason to be super professional as an interior designer, even though people maybe don't expect that from you as much as in other careers. So just as in any other industry, from our experience, what we've seen, it feels really important to actually take some time out to do really careful planning. Even though I'm personally probably, totally with Tim on like the emotional approach, but we do just time and again, it feels that people have a lot less of a stressful time and are able to start really making profit when they bother to even just take one day to just plan out their business, also choose your business model, and then, which sounds a little bit in opposition to this, just continually reassess. So just because you've kind of made a plan and chosen a business model to begin with, that doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to make sense 6 months down the line. Obviously, as your business grows, as you start working on different projects, you might actually have to totally change that and take a completely different approach. It's something we do as a company, actually at least twice a year, is sit down and think, those plans we did at the beginning of the year, does that even make sense at all anymore? And we have done some quite significant upheavals of it as well. So starting with pricing, again, just starting at the real kind of core of it. We discussed this as a team, and something that really came out is that it feels like it is actually a question of philosophy at heart. And it's kind of about how you actually want to work with your clients. And I know that makes it sound simpler than it is because, of course, everyone might really want to work transparently, and sometimes that feels difficult. But I think it's actually helpful to remember that you do have agency, and ultimately the important thing is to be really comfortable with the way that you're pricing your work. Because if you're not comfortable with it, then your client won't be comfortable with it. And that is something that again comes up again. It's that when people present their pricing in a sort of nervous or awkward way, it shows and people don't want to pay. But something you obviously have to remember being in the service industry is your client's philosophy is also important. And sometimes they do have different philosophies, so it might actually be more important to your client just to be really efficient or really simple and kind of have less paperwork than it is to kind of have a more collaborative approach. So understanding that as well, and who your kind of market is important. So before we just go into different pricing structures, I just want to run through the principal agent thing, because it does come up and generally causes considerable amount of confusion. So this is related to how you sell FF&E. And there's kind of two main ways you can do it. You can do it as a principal or you can do it as an agent. So if you're operating as a principal, essentially you are a retailer. So you are actually purchasing goods, you're then selling the goods at a markup of your choice, but generally you'd be selling at recommended retail price. Whether or not you actually pay VAT on the products initially depends on whether you are VAT registered as a business or not, because you're the ones purchasing the goods. You have to comply with a sales order and a purchase order, and you have to comply with the Sale of Goods Act. So there's more responsibility involved in being a principal. The benefits are traditionally used to be seen that you could make more profit on products, potentially, if you're working as a retailer. I take that with a pinch of salt because it isn't always the case, depends on the discounts that you're getting. And also control. So if you're working as a principal, you can just purchase goods when you want them and then sell them, and again, that was traditionally seen as a potential benefit. The risks are that you're liable for the products, which is considerable risk. If the client suddenly changes their mind or there's an error with the product, then you're the one who has to deal with that because you've purchased it. And so risk generally to the project. So as an agent, it's different. You're never buying the products. You're invoicing the client directly, which means that you're legally obliged to reveal the discount that you're getting because you can't invoice for an amount that isn't the net price of the product. And you're charging for your services as opposed to the product. Then whether or not you pay VAT actually depends on whether the client is VAT registered because they're the ones purchasing the product. And that's something that seems to trip a lot of people up as well, is you'll think that because you're a business and VAT registered, you should be not paying VAT if it's an EU product. But actually, if you're working as an agent, you should be paying VAT if your client is purchasing it and they're not VAT registered. You only have to create a purchase order, and you don't ultimately have responsibility for the product. So the benefits are there's way less risk, and also what's generally seen as a benefit is that you are transparent about your pricing. And you're showing your client that you're achieving a discount for them on their behalf. The risks are potentially you're getting less profit, but again, I'm just putting that there because I think that kind of was seen as a reason to maybe choose being a principal, but I don't feel that anyone I talk to in the industry feels that anymore necessarily. And potentially less control, but again there's ways around that, and a lot of interior designers that we work with just have access to a shared bank account or something so that they make sure that if they need to make a purchase or put down a deposit quickly for an order, they have the funds to be able to do so. So coming into different pricing structures then for your business. One way of making money on FF&E is a cost plus model, where you're basically making a margin on the FF&E, and this relates to generally be an agent in this respect. So what you do here is you charge for your service, so generally called a handling fee, on the net price, which is the RRP less your designer discount. The benefits of this model is that it's really transparent, and again, it feels more and more that as an industry altogether, it's evolving to be way more transparent, and people really, really value that. Generally, you're still saving the client money, which is also a benefit because your client sees that, it helps build the relationship, and you're not incentivized by the level of discount that you get from a supplier, which is also good because it builds more trust with the client. Potential issues are that it doesn't account for time spent. So generally, people find it very hard to make enough money on a project just using this. You might spend a day finding a product, and then they might decide actually they only want that £500 table, and you literally made £70 for the whole day's work. So you do have to be wary of it. The profit's very variable. You can still be incentivized by product price. It just makes sense that it's better for you if someone buys a more expensive product. And if clients are savvy, then they can figure that out as well, and then it causes potentially a trust issue. And the client may purchase direct. So if you're relying on it heavily to make a lot of money, and then they purchase direct, then obviously you've just lost that money. So there's definitely some issues associated with this. Then the other way of making money on FF&E is the retail models. That would be working more as a principal. So if you're getting your £5,000 RRP product with a discount, then you're paying £3,500 and selling it at RRP, then you're getting a £1,500 designer's fee. Obviously, if the product is 10 times less, then you're getting £150. Either way, you're getting double the amount that you're getting on the cost plus model. So the benefits are you can potentially make more margin, and some people think it's just a very simple way of doing it because you just say to your client, you're just buying products at RRP. However, the issues are, again, profit is very variable depending on what they purchase. It doesn't account for time spent, again, can end up costing the client more. You're not maybe providing as much value to your client. It's generally not transparent, and actually there is a view that this kind of pricing model has led to a real kind of distrust within the industry and has made it kind of harder for clients to trust interior design as a profession. And the client might purchase direct, and then you lose all of your profit and fee. And there's more risk if you're acting as a principal as well, because you're taking on liability for those products. Overall, I think the important thing here actually is that you have a lot less control over the fees. So we've actually kind of done different models of if you did a project and you had this pricing structure, how much would you make? If you have that project pricing structure, how much would you make? And the thing about this is that you're never able to look at a project, estimate how much time it's going to take you, and think, well, this is what I need to cover my costs, and then make sure that you cover your costs. You just can't do that with this model because it completely is out of your hands. It depends on the products that they buy. So it's very hard to actually make sure that your business is going to be commercially sound using this model. So then you can charge an hourly rate. Now, I don't know many designers in the UK that charge an hourly rate, but in the US it actually happens a lot, and it works for them. And I think maybe that's to do with the fact that the perception of interior design in the US is slightly more advanced than it is in the UK. So this might be something that starts becoming easier here because we tend to have a little bit of a lag in terms of perception here. So this is obviously where you just keep a timesheet and charge for hours spent. You develop a kind of, potentially you can have a sliding scale of how much you charge per hour depending on who in the team is leading the design. Often people have a project minimum, so if it's a small project, you make sure you're still getting a certain amount on it. And it's good because you can make sure that it is actually covering your business operating costs. As a very simple calculation, Jenny Grove has just written a book called Interior Design Professional Guide, and she kind of suggests as a very simple estimation that you can do, if you double the hourly rate that you charge, that you pay someone in your team, then that will overall kind of give you your business operating costs. And then if you triple it, then you're looking at kind of starting to make a profit there. So it's actually great because you make sure you cover your costs and you have control, you can make a profit. It's very transparent. But on the negative side, you do really need an accurate scope. If you say to a client, I was probably going to take a week and then it takes 2 weeks, you've kind of just charged them double what they thought you were going to charge them. So it does lead to client disputes, and this happens quite a bit. We've heard of it happening a number of times. Also, initially it leads to disputes because people say, well, why does it take that long to do something? And the same thing that honestly all freelancers get when they charge on a time-based fee. So you need to log time meticulously. And you need to also keep your business operating costs down because taking a model like this, for example, doubling your hourly rate, relies on your business operating costs kind of maintaining a steady rate. But if suddenly they increase because maybe you haven't kind of planned effective marketing, you end up spending loads of money on marketing, then that calculation won't actually make sense anymore. So overall, if you choose to go down this route, the most important thing is being really clear and really realistic about what can be achieved in a given time. And I think one of the main reasons why we feel there's reluctance from interior designers to do this is that a lot of interior designers that we work with, it seems like they're so kind of obsessively into their design in an amazing way that it's like, well, how can I know when to clock up that time for a project or not? And so people end up actually just not logging hours that they're working on the product, so then you're kind of not really getting paid for your time anyway. So I actually think that's the hardest thing about, you have to know that you as a person is someone that can just say, right, now I'm working on this project, now I'm not working on this project. And if you are, then it could totally work for you. And then design fees. So this is generally what we're seeing most interior designers charge by at the moment. And this is where you charge for the whole project. So you might have a fixed fee for the whole project. You might charge by square foot. You might charge by rooms. Or you might charge by a percentage of the overall bills. Typically this doesn't include making money on FF&E. Different types of projects suit different structures. So often with commercial projects, people might charge by square foot or they might charge a percentage on the overall build, which makes sense because with commercial projects, it's likely to have a lot of change. So you want to make sure that that's kind of built into the pricing structure. But with residential, it might make more sense to do it by rooms or something like that. The benefit is that you can make sure it covers your costs. You can literally calculate it before, and make sure it covers your costs and that you're making a profit. So you have a lot of control over it, and it's completely transparent. The issues are, you do have to be careful of fixed fees because the scope almost always changes. So if you've charged a fixed fee on a project and then the scope changes, then again, that's a surefire route to potentially losing money on the project. So it relies on really good planning and estimation up front. And you need to also estimate the time spent on FF&E, which is really difficult because how do you know how long it's going to take you to find a product, or how do you predict that there's going to be an issue with a product that's going to end up taking you a week to sort? So ultimately, realistic project scope and policy on amendments is key. So you need to actually talk to a client about what happens if the scope changes, what happens if it ends up taking longer, or they decide they want actually something additional done that they didn't originally figure out. Susie will go through this in more detail when she goes into her kind of case studies. But yeah, having a policy on how many times you're going to iterate, or making sure that you have the space to go back to them and increase the fee if there are lots of changes made throughout the project. Ultimately, you have to remember that you're still charging for your time, so that's what you need to keep an eye on and make sure that all the time you spend on the project is being paid to you. So using a combination is really kind of what we have seen is the winner here. Most people who are most happy with their pricing model, and what seems to work best for most people, is to charge a design fee and a margin on the FF&E. So it's a combination of design fee and cost plus. Benefits are it's very transparent, it accounts for your time and your overheads, and also allows that bit of space if FF&E ends up taking a long time, which it often does. So make sure you're making a bit of money on that aspect of the project as well. It's fair for the client. It's lower risk because you're not taking ownership of the product, and it's very adaptable, so it works with different types of projects, and it allows you to say, this is my pricing model, it's quite clear structure, but it's not it's not inflexible, so it works and you can adapt it for different clients. Something that also works really well is giving options, so saying, here's one way I could charge you, but here's another, and just being totally clear with the client, so almost allow them to make the choice, if you can take the time to explain to them what the positives and negatives are on each side. And that kind of helps build trust as well, because people don't feel that you're trying to force them down any particular route. Also having different pricing structures at different stages of the project. So something that a lot of people do that seems to work really well is charging an hourly fee maybe at the beginning. So just when you're actually trying to get the initial scope of the project, you might charge an hourly fee because that's kind of easier to estimate. You say, look, I'll spend 3 hours with you scoping this out and I'll charge you this for that. And at that point, you can provide them with more of a kind of considered design fee. And also potentially offering tiered pricing depending on actually the projects and services required within the project. So depending on maybe how much technical skill they need, how many resources they need, you could decrease the fee or increase it. So then the next question is really, how do you actually value your work and your time to come up with the appropriate fees? So a lot of people, when they're starting up, it feels like will essentially just see what they can get away with, and I think that's something that we heard from the panel. You know, it's pretty normal when you're starting a business. Obviously, it isn't really what the cost should be based on. The cost for your client should be based on a realistic scope of work. And I think I put the word realistic in here a lot because it feels like that's one of the main reasons actually why interior designers end up not making as much money as they think they could make or should be making, is just because of not quite being realistic in terms of how long something's going to take or what the scope of work is. And clients will not really ever have a realistic scope of work. Then your experience, obviously that should be taken into account in terms of how much you charge, and also your team's experience. Any specialist skills that you have that are also required on the project. Current market value does come into it, so there are obviously quite a lot of interior designers, and that kind of does need to be taken into account. However, it doesn't mean you should be charging kind of rock bottom, and I think that's something that, as an industry, it's almost like everyone needs a bit of a silent pact on, not going too low, because it actually kind of ruins it for everyone else a bit. Then the amount of resources required and how much time the project is going to take. So things that you need to consider for yourself as well are how much you want the project. So that contradicts a little bit what I said before, but I haven't really spoken to any interior designer that didn't essentially have to do a project or a few projects for quite a low amount of money when they started out, and that's just normal because, and it's also fine because you really need a project, you need a portfolio, you need images. So I think it's reasonable to take that into account. Also, if you're trying to get into a new industry, then you may do something for a lower fee as well. You do need to establish your own overheads and make sure that they're incorporated into your design fees. I do think that everyone who keeps a timesheet seems to be much better able to estimate their overheads, and it is kind of a lengthy thing to do, but there are really good tools out there. If you just search kind of timesheet, I can't actually remember them. There's Your Time, there's hourly.com, there's a lot of apps now that just make it quite easy for you to track your time. And even if you're not doing hourly, you need to do that to be able to review your projects and think, did I actually make money on that project? And also to estimate your future projects. Then always add in a contingency, because things just always go wrong, there's always snagging. And then also considering your cash flow. So just to kind of put that in there, it's not only about having a pricing structure and being able to convince your client to pay that, it's also making sure that you'll be able to invoice them in a way that kind of keeps your business flowing. And obviously when you're purchasing products, and you're going to need to pay a deposit. So we have come across situations where you might have a really good price agreed with your client, but people didn't consider kind of their invoicing structure, and then you can hit serious problems. So overall, just don't underestimate your worth, and I think that's something that, again, we're really, as a team, to see happening again and again. And I think it comes back to that thing of being in a creative industry and so many people being so passionate about what they do, but that almost making it harder to just know that the service is a professional service and they should be charging professional fees. So this is a quote from Jenny Grove, and I've got a little section of further reading that we'll send around after, and it's a really good book that she's just published, actually. She says, it's just a kind of helpful overall estimation. She says, by multiplying the number of hours you estimate it will take by the hourly rates for each person's time, you will have an idea of the total cost you should be charging for the project. It's probably a good idea to add on 15 to 20% contingency. This figure is then the benchmark for breaking down how to charge. So just if you want some kind of more specific guidance, then I do recommend getting that book, because it's a good place to start if you kind of haven't looked at your projects yet. And just to finish off this section, I guess a kind of number one point that we see in the community is that transparency and communication really are key. For a few reasons. One is that trust is the most important thing that you have with your client. Getting repeat business and referrals is by far the cheapest way you can ever get business. And if you lose trust, then you lose that. And transparency is kind of the key to trust. And especially in this industry, it feels like that it does have a bit of a legacy of mistrust. And that's something that I think is really being ironed out now with a lot of organizations. And again, almost all the interior designers we work with now are saying how important they think that is. Also, the information is out there anyway, so people can find out about designers' discounts. And also I know tons of stories of clients getting in contact with suppliers and trying to get discounts and pretending they're an interior designer. So it just happens all the time, so there's really no point kind of not being upfront about that. Also, it does affect the credibility of the industry. This is something we've kind of done quite a few roundtable sessions, and we had a lunch event with some design leadership network that Susie was at, and this came up a lot as well. People really strong feeling that transparency and being really clear in communication is really important for the credibility of the whole industry. It's kind of prevention rather than cure. Once you kind of lose that trust, or someone finds out you haven't been transparent, then obviously you just can't get that back at all. And as I said, it leads to repeat business.